Hey, like I said before, it's Christmas season. We want to start a new series about Christmas, and I thought we could start that with a little bit of Christmas trivia, right? So I want you to think, okay, rattle through your brain that's maybe still a little hungover from Turkey Day. Who is the first character that appears in the Christmas story in the New Testament? Now, I know we talked about Isaiah the prophet is prophesying about Jesus is coming. In the New Testament, who's the first character that appears in the story? It's actually somebody that gets a message from an angel. Okay, who's the first character? How many would say Mary's the first one? Oh, you got. How many say it's Joseph? Nobody. How many say shepherds? Wise men? Somebody want to hazard a guess? I'm going to tell you in a minute. I bet it's one you haven't thought of before. I bet it's a guess you wouldn't think of. Zechariah. Zechariah. Okay, and anybody in your nativity set, does anybody have a Zechariah little guy in the nativity? No, we don't have that. Normally, when you think about Christmas, you do not think an old guy who is a priest, Zechariah. But the reality is, the Christmas story, the story of coming to earth in the New Testament, gets kicked off not by Mary, not by Joseph, or the wise men, or any of the ones that we normally think about. Zechariah, a message from an angel with his own ears, and he didn't believe. And the reason he didn't believe it is a same reason that maybe you struggle with believing what God wants to say. And I want to look at that and maybe not make the same mistake. Now, as we start the series, I want to explain an important dynamic to you. The series is titled Believe, and it's about what you believe. Obviously, Christmas is a season where we talk a lot about believing, and one of the best examples of believing is the movie The Polar Express. Any Polar Express fans in the house? Anybody? Yeah. Around our household, it's Polar Express and Buddy the Elf. All right, every Christmas we're watching those two. But Polar Express, if you guys haven't seen it somehow, it's a simple idea that this boy gets a chance to go to the North Pole. He's not sure if he believes in Santa or not. And there's Santa's sleigh. There are all of these silver bells, right, on the sleigh. And the boy hears bells, and everyone else is excited. He can't hear, and it's because he doesn't believe. And that the moment that he says, okay, all of a sudden that bell starts ringing. There's something about it doesn't change reality. What you believe about something doesn't change what is, but it often changes how you experience reality. And I want you to write this down in your notes. This is going to be for today, but for the whole series. What you believe about God will determine what you receive from God. What you believe about God will determine what you receive from Him. Well, that doesn't seem very fair. Is God going to do what He's going to do, whether I believe in Him or not? God's going to do what He set out to do in the world. Absolutely. But what you believe about Him will affect not the fact of who He is, not the reality of what's happening around you, but how you receive it. And the reason is there's a middle piece in here between believe and receive. And it's this word, respond. See, this is the active piece, because what you believe about something will affect how you respond to a situation. And how you respond to what God's doing will affect what you receive. Let me give you an example. Many of you guys know I'm a Dallas Cowboys fan. Okay? And I like to mess with Packers fans a little bit, if you hadn't noticed. All right? I've got this belief. The Cowboys are better than the Packers, and Packers fans, they don't like me messing with them very much. All right, so let's say that I got this thought into my head. Packers fans, they don't like me. I'm a nice guy just because I root for the Cowboys, but I'm always wearing the Cowboys star and stuff when I go out. Those Packers fans in town, this is not even Wisconsin. They don't like me. Okay? If I believe that, then that changes how I respond to Packers fans. If I believe they don't like me, then am I nice to them? Am I giving them friendly faces? Am I high-fiving them? No. If I believe Packers fans just don't like me, then I respond to that belief by treating them poorly and making fun of their team. And what happens when I treat them poorly? They don't like me. I don't like that Pastor Chris guy. Those Cowboys fans, all of those Cowboys fans are annoying, right? I don't like them. And so what happens is I believe they don't like me. I respond by treating them bad. They respond by not liking me. And what I create is the thing that I believed. It becomes reality not because of the way that they feel, but because of the way that I act. There's many times in your life where what you believe about God will affect how you respond to what he's trying to do in your life. How you respond to his promises that are written to you. How you respond to the situation. Become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so what we want to do over these 5 weeks of Christmas is look and investigate some of these times when we believe something about God that's just not true. And we want to realize that like a good chiropractor with the spinal alignment, we want to get things back in alignment with truth. And Zechariah between what he believed and what is reality. Let me show it to you. Luke, starting in verse 5. Luke gives the most thorough of all of the accounts of Jesus' birth. And listen to what, this is a long passage. You can follow along on the screen. You can use the YouVersion Bible app with whatever translation on your phone. I'm going to be reading from the New Living Translation. It says this: when Herod was king of Judea, there was a Jewish priest named Zechariah. Zechariah and Elizabeth were righteous in God's eyes. This is important. And they were careful to obey all of the Lord's commandments and regulations. This was not a bad guy. This is a guy who he has devoted his life to serving the Lord. And you may not realize, in Jesus' time, a lot of the priests in Jerusalem were not good guys. There was a lot of corruption, a lot of people who were going through the motions but didn't actually serve God with their hearts. It's important here that Luke specifies this is one of the good ones. Imagine this is one of the politicians who actually does it to serve the people and not to pad their pockets. That's the thing here. This is one of the good guys. He was actually righteous. Verse 7, they had children. Was unable to conceive, and they were both very old. One day Zechariah was serving God in the temple, for his work was that week. In the sanctuary, an angel of the Lord appeared to him, standing to the right of the incense altar. Zechariah was shaken and overwhelmed with fear when he saw him. But the angel said, "Don't be afraid, Zechariah. God has heard your prayer. Your wife Elizabeth will give you a son, and you are to name him John." Verse 15, he will be filled with the Holy Spirit even before his birth. Imagine that. That's a special kid. He'll be filled with the Holy Spirit at birth. And many Israelites to the Lord their God. Now, pause right there before you respond. Okay? Imagine, righteous guy, served the Lord his whole life. He's one of the that does it right. Angel appears that he can see with his eyes and hear with his ears and says, "Man, I have good news. God's going to do something awesome for you." Imagine how you would expect him to respond. And this is what Luke says. By the way, you say, how does Luke know this? You see him show up in the book of Acts. He actually went and interviewed the eyewitnesses and these things and compiled this like a great investigative journalist. So he most likely is interviewing, it's certainly Mary or his wife about this. Okay? So verse 18. So the angel just appeared to Zechariah. "Hey dude, great news." Here's how he responds. Zechariah said to the angel, "How can I be sure this is really going to happen? How can I be sure? I'm an old man now, and my wife is also well along in years. He's like, really, dude? Verse 19, then the angel said, I'm God. It's he who sent me to bring you the good news. But now, since you didn't believe what I said, everybody say, aha. Okay, that was kind of a, you don't sound like Sherlock. Let's try that again like Sherlock Holmes. Aha. Okay, now, okay, I see where that is. He said, since you didn't believe, you will be silent and unable to speak. What good is a phone call if you are unable to speak? He said, you'll be unable to speak, for my words will certainly be fulfilled at the proper time. Meanwhile, the people were waiting for Zechariah to come out of the sanctuary, wondering why so long. When he finally did come out, he couldn't speak to them. Now that's a kind of surprising response to me, if I think this guy is righteous, this guy has spent his whole career is serving God. His whole livelihood is focused on praying and on interacting with God. He is one of the very few people that has permission to go into the sanctuary where God's sits. Most people are outside. Anyone would respond properly, it should be this guy. And besides all of that, have you ever thought about this? How could anyone believe a glowing angel that suddenly appeared to you by name? How could that? Seems kind of unrealistic. Would anybody doubt that? I mean, I understand. Okay, if it were you or me, and you're like, I just kind of feel like God said this to me, it's easy for us to say, well, was that really God, or was that the pizza that I ate last night? I'm not sure. It's really hard to doubt when an angel is talking to you. And you say, well, he says he's old, so how can he conceive? But this guy is right, so he knows that in Israel's history, there have been times where God comes to somebody who is old. Okay, famously, there wouldn't be a nation of Israel had come to Abraham and said, I'm going to make you there. And famously, Abraham's wife laughed about it, and she's like, yeah, right. And then it came to pass. He can quote that from memory. I believe what's going on here, I think there's a clue in his punishment. The fact that he's unable to speak. Because if you look at it, that's the only time that we see recorded in the Bible where a is punished by making somebody mute. It's kind of a unique thing. And I think it's unique because it's supposed to point us to where the root of the problem is. In time, it's easy for us to miss. But at this point in time, God has not spoken to the nation of Israel as a whole in 400 years. I don't know if you ever realized between the Old Testament and the New Testament, there's this big gap from heaven. Malachi last of the prophet spoke, he's down. Between Malachi and this moment, God is not to that. Now, speak to individual people, most likely, yeah. As far as something God to his name, serving him, nothing. 400 years. So long that nobody like. Imagine this. Imagine an alternate reality. Imagine an alternate reality where there was no Revolutionary War, but the 13 original colonies that were getting regular messages from England, all of a sudden the boat stopped coming. Nobody sent anything. Radio silence from King James. And eventually, we just as Americans, we figure out, well, I don't know if England is still there. I don't know if they don't care anymore. I don't know if they got overrun by France. They don't seem to care, so we'll just become our own nation. So imagine what happened, okay? And from 1623 until now, there's silence. And then this guy shows up at your door. Can we put that up? For those of you guys here in the room, we have that? Okay. See that snazzy looking outfit? Okay. Imagine there's been nothing from England for 400 years. This guy shows up at your door, knock, knock, knock. You open the door and he says, "Good afternoon, sir. I bring to you good news from His James, King of England." You're like, what is going on? Like, am I being pranked now? Where's the secret camera? Okay? You have to understand. Spoken in so hundreds of years, generation after generation has said, we have faith to the interacting with us business. Served God. The best news of life doesn't believe it when an angel is talking to him face to face. It's because Zechariah made an assumption. His belief off, and it's a belief that you and I slide into easily. And I want you to write this down because I don't want you to make the same mistake that he did. Don't mistake God's distance for disinterest. Don't mistake God's distance. Don't mistake God's silence. Don't mistake, I haven't heard from him in a while. I haven't seen the answer come through in a while. I think no one's listening on the other line. I think if he is listening, he doesn't seem to care. Don't mistake God's distance for disinterest. Because clearly, he was still very much involved in what was happening with humanity. Think about this. If God were going to go silent for 400 years, okay, he knew this was the plan. It would help us to understand what was the last thing that he said, right? Anybody ever really need to reach somebody and you get the out of office reply? Anybody ever before? Like, I have this weekend to get done, and this government official that my tax dollars are funding, and so, well, I'm going to vacation for the next 6 weeks, so email me when I come back. It's, okay. If God were going to go off into the distance for 400 years, it's probably instructive. Look at what he said last, before he went quiet. Okay? Last prophecy he gives to Malachi. Look at this, Malachi chapter 1, verse 1, right at the beginning. This is the message that the Lord gave to Israel through the prophet Malachi. I love you. You loved us. Think about that. God knows he's going to go silent. And he begins this last message with a reminder. Guys, when you feel like you don't have love, it's me. He's loved you. Like it or not. Now that was a message to the people in that day. Absolutely. But I believe it was also a message to every generation, and especially those living when it's been 100 years since he's spoken, 200, 400 years since God said anything, but the last thing that he said was, I've always loved you. Even when you say, I can't tell, dude. It doesn't feel like it. Because you better believe in those 400 years, people felt like God no longer loves us. Okay, let me give you a short version of what happened between the Old Testament and the New Testament. We leave the record in the Old Testament. Israel is still sort of a vassal state under the Persian empire, and they're going to go and rebuild the temple. They're kind of paying taxes to the Persians, but have their own worship experience in Jerusalem again. Okay, that, and when this angel comes to Alexander the Great shows up. Anybody remember him from history class? You probably never thought of Alexander being an important component in God's work to bring Jesus to humanity. But Alexander the Great shows up, and the Greek Empire just steamrolls everything through this little speed bump called Israel. It becomes part of the Greek Empire. And then Alexander dies. There's nobody successful to take on his empire. It kind of falls into pieces. They fight over who gets to control what region. Israel has a little bit of time where they kind of halfway have independence. And then the Roman Empire shows up. And Julius Caesar just starts all through everything. And they get steamrolled again. And now they're part of the Roman Empire. And most of you realize that Julius Caesar was an important part of what God's doing. But all of this stuff is happening, taking punch after punch, and it would be to doesn't care about us anymore. We're not listening. And we know they were still praying. Because in verse 13 of our original passage, and we'll put it up here, Gabriel says to Zechariah, God has heard your prayer. God has heard Zechariah's. Okay, think about this, right? Righteous guy. He has no heir. His wife cannot conceive. Righteous man who doesn't say, I'm going to find an excuse to divorce my wife and marry a different one who can conceive. He says, this is the spouse for me. God says he hates divorce. We're in this together. God, please allow my wife to have a child. You have to understand, in that time, they didn't understand about regular common infertility problems. The belief was, if you can't conceive, it's because God is angry with you over something. And so here's a guy who at some point in his life has prayed and said, God, please change what's happening. Allow my wife to have a baby. We really want to have a family. And years later, the answer comes and God says, you got it. And he's like, nah. What? You're the one who asked for this. This is specifically God answering your prayer, Zechariah. You prayed it. And here's the important thing to understand. It's Gabriel, and he's like, oh man, this is awkward. He's going through the royal email, here's the junk folder. I said, oh my goodness, Zechariah emailed me like 60 years ago about it. So late. Good news, he's God, so he can fix it. Like it's, good. No. He says, your prayer has been answered. And I understand this, and maybe this has been you. Sometimes the gap between praying and God answering at all, sometimes that gap teaches you, well, God must not care. Sometimes you start and you believe, because you wouldn't ask him for help if you didn't think he could or that he would. If you truly believe there's no way God's going to answer my prayer, you wouldn't even speak it. You only pray because you believe maybe. That's the only answer. But somehow this belief over time, with God not answering, somehow it became, I don't believe that anymore. He must not care. It must not be for me. That must be for somebody else. God doesn't care about what I'm going through. And the question you need to ask today is, do you believe that God actually cares about your life? Not your soul. We know God cares about your soul. Do you believe that he actually cares about your life? About the things that cause you pain, about the things that keep you up at night. Because he doesn't always swoop to the rescue. Do you believe that? What you believe will change how you respond, like it did for Zechariah, and how you respond in many times will change what you receive from God. I want to align. Let's write this down. This deep down into your soul. How you feel about God does not change how he feels about you. How you feel about him in the moment, how you feel about his distance, how you feel about his way of answering or not. You feel, and that changes how you respond. It doesn't change the he feels about you. That's Malachi 2. He says, I've always loved you. And how you feel about him doesn't change how he feels about you. Here's something interesting. Okay? 400 years of silence from God. They were not 400 years of inactivity. You said, well, I'm sure people were praying, God save us from Alexander. God deliver us from the Romans. He didn't. this, okay? Did you know that Jesus, when he wrote the Old Testament, quoted equally from two different translations? We have multiple translations. You know that? Jesus quoted from both the Hebrew Old Testament, which was the only version, all the way up until Alexander and the Greek Empire comes, and then they translated the Bible into Greek. Greek was the lingua franca that was spoken and understood by. And until time, all of the truth of the Old Testament, all the prophecies about Jesus, they were in this new language that most people didn't understand. The Bible today is the English and Greek, even though most of what Jesus spoke was in Aramaic. Because Greek is a much more articulate written language. If the Greeks had not overrun Israel, we probably wouldn't have New Testament. Convenient or intentional? What about the Romans? Okay, until Rome, traveling any distance overland was a dangerous venture. One of the amazing things that the Romans did, they were so good at so many things. One of the things they were especially good at is roads. Anybody ever hear about Roman roads? If you go to Europe, still roads today that were built during the Roman Empire because they did it right. Okay? They did not have big potholes in the main street that they were closing one of the lanes all of the time to try to fix how the water was going to, right? The Romans, they had it figured out, man. And here's what the Roman roads did. Once those roads were in place, it was safe for people to travel. They were not only well-built roads, they were maintained and they were patrolled by soldiers. You could actually travel over land and not get attacked by bandits. Pretty useful if you have the greatest message that's ever been given to mankind and you need that message to spread quickly. Sometimes when it looks like God's not paying attention, when God's not helping, he's actually doing something very important. We just don't see it. Don't mistake for disinterest. I want you to write down, you need to remind yourself of, because there's stuff you know here, but there are things that when there's a gap between what you ask and what you hear from God, you're going to question. And it's important when you question these things to hang on to what the facts are. Fact number one, whether or not you feel like it, even when he seems silent, God still sees. God still sees what's happening in your life. Psalm 34:15. His ear. Even when it feels like he's not paying attention, even when it feels like he's God still sees. It reminds me of when my oldest son Ethan was a baby, and we determined, Brock, we needed to be able to sleep at night. You know what I'm talking about? We're going to go crazy if this child does not sleep more than like 30 minutes at a time. Some of you know what I'm talking about. So we read this book and we did online articles and we're like, okay, we need to do sleeping on this baby. And here's how that goes. Okay, we would his crib, and if he went right to sleep, it was a miracle. Time. We put him in the crib and we would let him cry. We'd step out of the room and we would let him cry for 5 minutes. And then we'd come in, and shh, it's okay, we're still here. And then we'd leave. And we'd let him cry for 5 minutes. And we'd come in, let him come in, let's come in. And the next night, we'd let him cry for 10 minutes. And then we would come back in. It's okay, we're here. 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes. Next night, 20 minutes. And what happened is after a few nights of that, here's what we did. By stepping away, we trained him that when you don't see daddy in the room, here. When you don't see mommy and daddy, when you don't feel their hand, they decided that they no longer love you. Still going to get fed, you're still going to get changed. Because you don't see them, but they're still here. And so we had peace that even if he couldn't see us, and we were attentive to his needs. My friends, there are times when we don't see God that he doesn't see. He said, I've always loved you, whether you feel like it or not. The Bible says, the eyes of the Lord watch over those who are right, and his ears are open. Don't mistake God's distance for disinterest. One more truth to write down before we wrap up. When he feels silent, God still speaks. God has something to say about what's going on in your life. Psalm 4, I pray and he freed me from life. And sometimes that message comes in a place you're not expecting it. I remember years ago when my grandfather was still living, and he's with the Lord now, and my grandmother as well. Years ago when he was still living, my mom sent me a text like she always would and said, hey, it's Papa's birthday. Tell him happy birthday today. I'm like, yeah, you got it. Never miss that. So being a borderline millennial Xer, I'm kind of right on the... I pulled out my phone and I texted my grandfather, hey, Papa, happy birthday. Hope you're having a good day. Love you. Okay. A couple of days ago, and my grandmother, she called me and she said, hey, your grandfather's feelings, you didn't even talk to him on his birthday. I said, Nana, what? I pulled up, I'm like, oh my goodness, did I not hit send? I hit send, it's right there. I texted him, and she kind of laughed and said, I don't even think he knows how to open the message. Like, he had no idea that you even sent that. Okay? What you believe affects how you respond. How you respond determines what you receive. So if you say, God, I'm waiting for the angel to show up in my bedroom, he might be sending all kinds of messages to you, but you're not getting it because you're like, I don't think God cares. I don't think God's speaking. So many things that God speaks to us. Sometimes it's when you're reading the Bible and it just jumps off of the screen at you. Sometimes it's when you're at a youth conference or you're in youth service. Sometimes it's when you're in church on Sunday morning. Sometimes it's when a friend is telling you something, but it has that extra layer of truth to it and you know it. Sometimes God speaks in a way that it's like you can almost hear it in your ears. Sometimes it's just a thought that he implants in your mind. Sometimes it's a dream. There's so many different ways that God can speak. But if you believe he doesn't care and you're not listening for any of it. And I would hate for you to miss the answer to your prayer because you believe God doesn't actually care. Yeah, I want to ask you that whatever it is in your life, whatever the challenges are, would you rather have God help in spite of your doubt or God work in step with your faith? Because a lot of times what you believe about his caring will make a difference in what you receive. A lot of times he has comfort for you. If you're not listening for it, you don't hear it, you don't get it. I want you to think about this as we wrap this up. I want you to consider what an object lesson that was for Zechariah to be unable to speak. The Bible, after his son John was born, God opened his ability to speak. He was finally able to talk again. But for the whole time that his wife is carrying this baby, he can't speak not one word. Okay. How many of you are either parents or somebody you were close to, a sister, mom, baby? How many of you've been around when someone is in that process of pregnancy? Anybody? Yeah. Okay. Almost all of us. Almost all of us. Okay. If you've been that person, okay, dad, any dads in the room, you remember when you heard the news, we're going to have a baby, first timers especially. You remember when you heard the news, and there were so many things, there were so many thoughts that began to about this pregnancy. Rick, when you first found out you were going to become a father, those 9 months were full of dreams about what we might do together, what this child might be when they grow up. Jerry, when you first got the news, you probably spent those whole 9 months talking to that about, here are the things we're going to do together. Here, how do we want to set up the room? How do we want to do all of this? Okay, you cannot care at all about the child and have no thoughts about him. You're full of that. And here's a guy whose heart is full of care. This is his dream come. This is the wife that he loves so dearly who finally gets her dream come true. And here's a guy whose heart is full of emotion, is full of thoughts, and he's silent for 9 months. And I believe in that silence, God was teaching Zechariah, just because you're silent doesn't mean you don't care. Just because you're not speaking doesn't mean you're not thinking those things. Just because you're not saying it doesn't mean that you don't love this child dearly. And just because there was a period of silence, it didn't mean that I didn't care about you, about Israel. And I know that there are those seasons, and maybe you're in one of them today, where that gap between God help and any help coming is just widening and widening and widening. And you're like, I don't know what other conclusion to draw. He doesn't care. God, I wouldn't ask if I didn't think you could help. God, how many times do I have to ask, take this pain away from me? Help me not to think about this anymore. He doesn't seem to care. God, turn the hearts of my children back toward me. You know I love them. I don't even know what I say. Why are we estranged? Help me to reconnect. Not reconnect. God, I'm working as hard as I can, and the job doesn't seem to care. Can't get ahead. I'm just drowning in debt. God, please do something. Help. And it doesn't seem to care, and we draw the conclusion. He's disinterested. But in those 400 years, God still cared. In those 9 months of Zechariah and Elizabeth, God still cared. And God sees. Hey there, just wanted to take a minute to say thanks for watching. If a friend sent you this link, it's because they believe what we talked about today is going to make a positive impact in your life. And if it did, there's probably somebody that you care about who could benefit from it. So take a minute to share this video with somebody. Post it to your timeline or send them a direct link. And if you're able, take a minute to give using the link at the bottom of the description on this video. One last thing. Maybe you feel a tug at your soul and you're ready to take the next step in your spiritual life and form a relationship with God. We've got folks here who would love to talk with you about it. So just text prayer to the number on your screen and we'll follow up with you. It's also in the description on this video in case that helps. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.